Alrighty, welcome back to part 2 of the screencast for the lesson plan template instructions. So we're going to go down. We already did this top section in part 1, so we're going to get to lesson sequence. So in the lesson sequence section, and I typed all these instructions here, but I just want to make sure everybody is aware that you're going to do literally every single step of the lesson. So basically, like each minute of your 45 plus minute lesson plan should be detailed in this chart, which can sound a little overwhelming. But it's actually a little bit refreshing when it helps you prepare for the lesson demo, because it's literally like your script. It's telling you exactly what you're going to do. So it's broken up into the introduction, the lesson, and the closure. So you can start wherever you want, but we'll start with the introduction. And I provided some questions here to help you understand what kind of information would go in this section of your lesson sequence. So notice that the lesson sequence, each part of it is broken up into teacher and student. There's separate sections for those. And I did this because this is what administrators look at when they're walking into your classroom and seeing what you're doing, what your students are doing. At least the administrators in my district, that's what they do. So they want to see what is the teacher doing and what is the student doing. And a big red flag for administration, and really for all of us, is when the teacher section is full and the student section is pretty bare. So we want to see students doing stuff, whatever that stuff might be. We want to see students doing things and not just the teacher doing all the work during the class session. So questions to consider as you're working through the introduction: how will you introduce your lesson? How will you capture students' attention? How will you connect this lesson to prior learning and prior knowledge? And how will you communicate the learning objective to your students? I recommend that one of the first, things that you do in this part is write, literally write, teacher introduces the learning objective. And maybe that only takes like 1 minute. So you put the time there. And then as the teacher is introducing the learning objective, what should the students be doing? Are they writing it down in their notes? Are they reciting it with the teacher? Whatever it is they're doing, you should write what the students are doing at that same time. So maybe when the teacher is reading or introducing the learning objective, we want the students to write it. So students write learning objective in their notes. And I'm assuming that if they're on the same line, that means it's happening at the same time. So maybe after the students write the learning objective in their notes, we want the students to repeat the learning objective to their partners. So I'll write that here. Students repeat the learning objective to their partners. And that's only going to take 1 minute too. So you can see, I literally want you to spell out every single step of the lesson itself, like the whole thing, but starting with the introduction. So you're going to fill out, and each line would be a separate action. It doesn't all have to be broken down to like 1 minute. Maybe the students fill out a KWL chart. So students fill out a KWL, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's know, want to know, and learned. So maybe that's what students do next, and that's not going to take them 1 minute. Maybe that'll take them 4 minutes to do. So it's okay to have a line that represents more than 1 minute. This was just kind of an example of something that would just take a little bit of time. This might take a little bit longer. So you're literally going to fill out what is the teacher doing, what are the students doing for the introduction, for the lesson sequence, so like the main part of the lesson, and then also for the closure, how you're ending your lesson. And notice that with each section, I've given you questions to help guide you. So with the lesson, what is the sequence of instruction for the lesson? How much is the teacher doing compared to how much students are doing? And like I said before, there shouldn't be a huge imbalance where teachers are doing a lot and students are doing nothing or very little. How will you check for understanding throughout the lesson? This is so huge. I'm going to highlight it in red. It's like maybe not red because that's hard to see. I'm going to highlight it in yellow because this is like the thing. So you must have at least one check for understanding in the lesson. And again, if you're watching this screencast early in the class, you may not be an expert on checking for understanding, but there is a formative assessment bank assignment that you're going to do as part of this course. And you can feel free to use any of the formative assessments that you identified in your formative assessment bank in your lesson. I encourage that. And again, formative assessments, checks for understanding, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably, even though there might be slight distinctions, but that's what I'm looking for. Some kinds of formative assessments so that that as you're, going through the lesson, students are actually getting it. It's really important that you don't rely too heavily on students telling you when they get it. Sometimes teachers will say that they use a check for understanding, and really all they're doing is saying give me a thumbs up if you understand. Well, that's not really going to tell you whether students understand. Students could be dishonest about whether they understand. Students might think they understand and they don't. So just beware of that. But use at least one check for understanding, again, preferably not just one where students are telling you if they understand. And keep in mind that in your lesson demonstration, I want to see a check for understanding. So wherever you put your checks for understanding in your lesson sequence, think about using that part of your lesson for your lesson demonstration, because I do want to see that check for understanding. And then also think about the 4 C's. How are you going to incorporate communication, collaboration, creativity, and or critical thinking? If you include these 4 C's, the students are naturally going to be, doing things. So that's a good, if you're doing your lesson and you realize, oh man, I'm doing too much as the teacher, a good way to ensure that students are doing something is to incorporate checks for understanding and the 4 C's. So moving on to the closure segment. Also, one more thing I want to mention, if you run out of boxes, which you might, there's only 4 boxes here, you can always insert more. If you right click, you can just do insert a row below or insert a row below above. You can also, I think if you select more than one, it'll let you insert however many you've selected. So that was just highlighting it, and it was a right click. So insert 3 rows above or below or whatever. All right, so moving on to closure. So again, I've included some questions to help guide you. How will you conclude your lesson? How will you bring your students back to the essential question? And for that matter, how will you bring them back to the learning objective and make sure that they've met the learning objective, which is the next thing. So how will you determine, and how will students determine for themselves whether they've met that learning objective? Think about whether you're going to assign any independent practice or homework and what that would look like. And then how will students connect this lesson to what comes next in your larger unit? So all of those are considerations for the closure activity. And then the last 2 things down here, explorations and extensions. Please don't look over this one. I feel like this is probably one of the hardest things that we have to do as teachers, is think about, for our students who are doing really well, they really get things and they're moving along quickly, what are we going to do to extend their thinking? And it shouldn't always just be more of the same work. And it shouldn't always just be helping kids who don't understand. Those are okay things to have for explorations and extensions, but they shouldn't be the only things that we offer for them. We should have some sort of activity for them to take the thinking that we've given them during the lesson and have them take it one step further. So not just more, but maybe more complex activities. And then this part is the part that I think, especially as special education teachers, we think about all the time. How are we going to support the students who are having a hard time? How are we going to intentionally remove the barriers to their learning and their success? What will we do differently for which students, and why will we do things differently for those students? So this is where you think about your students with disabilities, your English language learners, particularly your long-term English learners and your migrant ed students. And just a caution about this section, one-on-one instruction is great. That is not the be-all and end-all. Think about other accommodations and modifications you can embed into the lesson, because one-on-one instruction is not possible for every kid in your classroom. So if you have a classroom full of 10 or 12 kids who have IEPs and they all struggle, you're not going to be able to provide one-on-one instruction to every single one of those students every time they need it. So what else can you do beyond that to accommodate them and to modify things to make them work for those students? So you can think about things like providing sentence frames and providing additional time, or reducing the number of sentences that you require them to write, like all those kinds of things. And again, I'm not expecting you to come up with all of these off the top of your head during some of the slides, some of the lessons for this course. You're going to learn about some different accommodations and modifications that are appropriate for students with different types of disabilities. And I strongly encourage you to just pull from those lists, like what sorts of accommodations and modifications would be appropriate for this particular lesson. So that is it. That's the end of the lesson plan. So the first part, again, in the first part of the screencast, we covered the top part. So if you missed that, you can go back and watch that part. And then we just finished up with the lesson sequence, and then the bottom part here with the explorations and extensions and the accommodations, modifications, differentiation, and UDL. And if you have any questions after watching both of these screencasts, feel free to reach out to me. Just a reminder that the best and quickest way to reach me is through email. So email me anytime, and I'll get back to you within 24 hours. I do go to bed early, so if you're emailing me late at night, I probably won't get back to you to the next day, but I'm here to help. Please utilize me. Thanks.